Tridentops. Redseaghosts. The sea spread out like polished obsidian, so flat the moonlight skimmed it in a silver ribbon, so dark the horizon blurred into a single unbroken line. The RHIB rode that ribbon fast and low, fiberglass hull whispering over chop, twin outboards wrapped in hushed kits grumbling under their cowls. Spray rose in a fine mist and came down cold on bare skin where sleeves didn't reach. Salt-crusted lips, stung cuts, and tasted like metal in the back of the throat. 6 shadows rode the bow to stern geometry of the boat, arranged by habit as much as plan. Cole stood behind the forward gun socket with his harness clipped to the ring, boot soles spread to drink the boat's movement, body leaning with the sea's long breath. His NVGs washed everything in green, a world of gradations where dark became darker still. He scanned without hurry, a slow clock-face sweep, counting the tiny betrayals open water always offered. Wake lines crossing where no vessel should be, a tower light winking against the black, heat plumes where engines idled too long behind the horizon's curtain. Ghost knelt in the bow, one gloved hand wrapped on the grab rail, the other resting on his rifle. He moved as little as a mounted optic, eyelashes a soft blink against rubber seals. There was a stillness to him that made the boat seem to move around his center. He watched the water the way a sniper watches breath, patient, inexorable, waiting for the rise. Brick sat portside midships with a pack that looked like it had eaten a smaller pack. His bulk filled the space in a way that bent shadows around him. The straps dug hard into his vest, ribs creaking when the RHIB bucked, but he grinned into the wind all the same. He smelled of CLP, salt, and that clean chemical thread that rides with demolition putty even when it's sealed. The sea took his grin and wore it like a threat. Doc hunkered opposite, back to the engine cover, knees spread, med roll clip tight where his left hand could find it without looking. He watched his men the way a surgeon watches anesthesia. Breath rates, micro tremors in forearms, the way a jaw clenched then let go, pupils under NVG green going too large or too small. He adjusted nothing, because adjustment came later. For now, he collected small truths and filed them under what to fix when blood made them visible. Havoc bent over a compact receiver sunk into foam by his knees, antenna wire hugged low and forward. The screen bled pale light under a blackout hood, green text crawling as the spectrum rolled. He had the kind of listen that goes through ears and keeps going, a feeling for patterns and noise that only the sleep-deprived and obsessed learn to trust. Bursts of Farsi cadence popped like distant lightning. Maritime beacons ticked their metronomes. Civilian AIS pings skated along, and under it all something else persisted. Quiet, disciplined, repeating on a schedule that didn't match anything commercial. Kid sat behind, Ghost with his rifle across his thighs, foregrip pressed to the meat of his palm, knuckles pale under glove. His breath rode in shallow cycles that fought the ribs movement. He adjusted once when he caught Doc's eyes and found the slower rhythm again, matching the bow's lift and settle. The Red Sea's night felt different than cities. The quiet wasn't silence. It was expectancy. Streets breathe in pulses. Water holds its breath and waits. The smell changed first. Salt and heat, always. But under it, a thin thread of diesel that came and went like a stray thought. Cole tasted it and scraped his tongue against his teeth. Havoc's voice rolled through the net, pitched low under the engine's hush. Traffic spike, North Straits, 48 seconds interval, encrypted framing non-commercial. Bearing 310 from present. That last part mattered. Bearings meant choices, choices meant time, and time was the only currency that bought survival. Cole raised his fist, and the driver feathered the throttles back. The RHIB planed down, then settled, wake falling into itself. The night sound grew big around them, the hiss of water along the hull, the tick-tick of spray cracking against rubber, the dry rattle of a strap somewhere that Ghost quieted with 2 fingers. The boat glided into a pocket of near stillness where the air was colder and a mist threaded low across the surface, a drift line of cooler current. The freighter's silhouette shouldered out of the dark by inches, a darker absence cutting the horizon where the sea met sky. No deck lights along the rails. No warm cabin glow. Just a faint geometry of superstructure with too many hard angles and an array of antennas that looked like a hedge of steel-stemmed thorns. It ran at a speed that made a strange wake, low throttle with too much rudder, like a man walking at night, who keeps looking over his shoulder. Ghost lifted his rifle, glassed the deck, found the shapes that moved too quiet and too right to be crew. A man leaned on a coil, but the lean kept his muzzle clear. Another stood with his shoulder touching bulkhead corner, angles that covered angles. The Cod's way. Take the ship's body and teach it how to hold a rifle. Cole motioned port wedge, and the RHIB slid wide to ride the freighter's stern quarter, staying in the shadow where moonlight fell short. The rib's driver read the water like braille, hands easing the throttles against micro-chop, keeping the bow from bobbing up in a lamp lines where a careless wake would telegraph their presence. The freighter screws churn a low, steady pulse that came up through boots and his shins, a vibration that told of mass and compression, gearboxes running hot and patient. Ghost marked sentry paths with the tip of his finger along the freighter's hull, like he was riding on water. Doc watched the little motions and translated them into timing. Brick saw them and started laying the puzzle of where braces lived behind steel and how sound would carry in those spaces. Havoc whispered a spread of numbers anybody else would call nonsense, and then said something small that mattered. AIS spoofing confirmed. Registry doesn't match hull broadcast. Vessel claims to be dry bulk from Muscat to Port Sudan. Antenna package says otherwise. The proof would ride in the drive later. For now, the proof was a wrong smell and a wrong wake and wrong men under a wrong flag. Cole clipped his line. Ghost and Brick did the same. Hooks rode in soft sleeves. Lines paid out silently. The first throw landed high and right with a soft clatter, lost under the diesels. Ghost tug-tested, then went over the gunnel in one fluid piece. He never splashed. He was there, and then he was not, and then his boots pressed hull steel, and he was a vertical thing making height. Brick went next. Heavier, a grunt rising unbidden from his chest when the line took his weight. The RHIB nudged closer and took a breath outward to kiss the ship as Cole went over, harness screeching soft when steel kissed aluminum through rubber bumpers. The climb put steel against skin, and the ship's quiet into bones. Boots found paint-slicked weld beads. Toes caught rust lips, fingers found seams. The ship breathed, a low, constant engine sigh, hydraulics somewhere muttering to themselves, a tiny ringing tremor from a pump far aft. The moon lurked just out of sight and painted the hull a black that wasn't black, but every dark color learned growing up in shadows. Halfway up, Ghost paused in shadow thrown by a hawse pipe and held. Cole froze 3 feet below without looking up. On deck, a man walked toward the rail and stopped with his weight skewed wrong for a sailor, knees slightly bent like a trigger weight check. He lit a cigarette with his body angled against wind he didn't have to fight. Smoke drifted and dropped in a wind pattern that made no sense on a moving ship. He took one drag, and then the butt flicked, a tiny comet that arced and fell short of the water. He turned his head, scanning the dark sea with the indifference of someone who expects the sea to keep its secrets. Ghost slid again, silent, upward. The rail came up slow, and then all at once. Ghost's hand found it, rolled wrist over, and his head rose just enough for one eye and half a green world. He harvested angles. Deck edge to the winch drum to the hatch combing to the shadow under the bridge wing. He saw the guard's route. He saw where light bled from a door that shouldn't be open and marked it as air-conditioned. The Cods like their servers cool. Ghost flowed over the rail and bled sideways into the shadow beneath a stack of spare hatch covers. He became less than the shadow. Cole came after, body low, rifle already pointed at the first angle Ghost had marked. Brick slipped over with a smile, staying low by necessity and by love of the sound steel makes when it decides not to talk. The RHIB dropped off a fraction and drifted back to black water, its driver holding the station with a touch that looked like not touching at all. Doc, Havoc, and Kid followed in order, the climb going into muscle and out through breath. The deck smelled of old oil and paint, salt and chain grease. Shoes scuffed lines into dust, where boots had passed too regular and too careful. Kid felt the deck underfoot and wanted to freeze, not from fear but from the pressure of soundless space. Noise gives cover if you know how to ride it. Silence demands perfection. Doc brushed his elbow as if by accident and continued past, muzzle tracking, eyes eating corners. The first sentry came out of nothing, walking a path that kept his back to nothing twice in 20 paces. Ghost stepped into his ear and took his throat without a sound bigger than the breath that left it. The body came down in two parts, man, then rifle, and neither part spoke. Brick caught the rifle and laid it under a coil that looked like it belonged to ropes no one had used in years. Cole memorized the sentry's face, because carrying faces is part of the job, even when the faces are the enemies. They moved along the starboard gangway beneath the bridge wing. The sea lapped its steel below, with a slap that carried up like a heartbeat out of time. Ghost pointed with two fingers, listening device tucked sloppy under a beam. Havoc slid and pulled the battery while his other hand kept the drive pouch pinned. He placed the dead bug where he found it. A circuit lives longer when it thinks it still matters. The wrong door opened into a light that hit the eyes like a knife. Cold air kissed sweat-damp skin. A corridor ran inboard, then bent around bulkheads, tight as throat. It spoke of retrofits, crews who cut the ship open and taught it to be something else. Ghost knelt by the jam and tapped metal with a knuckle in a pattern that wasn't random. Brick listened and smiled. Hollow. Space beyond. The kind of space where servers live and people don't, unless their job is to guard servers or kill men who come to teach them to die. Cole raised two fingers and pointed aft. Brick nodded and peeled off to plan insurance. Small teeth of shaped charges tucked where strength hid behind paint. Doc and Kid held the doorway, covering angles that changed with every exhale. Kid's breath started to get away from him again as the cold air spilled and brought with it the sterile scent of climate control and the faint electric tang of machines thinking fast. He claimed the breath back before Doc had to. Ghost looked at Cole across a strand of shadow, and the exchange said the rest. Inside meant speed and certainty, with none of the latter. Outside meant risk from angles you could at least count. But the mission lived inside. Intelligence about the routes and the funding and the names in Tehran came as digits pulled from heat-shedding boxes, not from soaking decks in blood. The war at sea wasn't romance. It was network warfare conducted under the range of missiles and mortars whose crews would never know the faces of the men they tried to kill. Cole closed his hand, opened it, and moved. The corridor swallowed them, each bootfall placed where metal wouldn't ring. Fluorescent strips boxed the world into sterile rectangles. A laminated safety placard had been translated poorly into Arabic and not at all into Farsi. Someone had been sloppy, or someone had wanted to be seen as sloppy. Ghost took the lead, Cole a breath behind, Brick's pack whispering against the bulkhead when the corridor pinched to make them feel too big. Havoc's hooded screen flickered and steadied, icons turning from passive to hungry as his receiver nuzzled the local air. Doc marked every door and every extinguisher bracket and every first aid box because anything that holds one kind of thing can be taught to hide another. A hatch ahead stood dogged but unguarded. The steel around its dogs bore tiny crescents of fresh scrape where wrenches had bit too recently. Brick leaned in, fingers reading metal temperature through glove. Warm. Machinery room beyond, or dense racks moving heat like lungs. Ghost looked low. A hair lay across the threshold hinge side, a sentry's trick to catch motion where sight could not reach. He took it off with a breath and a fingertip, lifted it back after Cole moved them through. The room beyond hummed, a living thing. Racks and rows made a kind of cold cathedral, LEDs blinking their catechism down aisles too tight for comfort. Cable looms ran like arteries overhead, tied with straps labeled in English and a slanting hand that didn't belong on a ship manifest. A single chair sat askew in front of a bank of screens where data drew maps that were not maps and lists that were not lists, All of it the kind of ugly beauty Havoc found by instinct, and love in a way that made men like him dangerous. No people. The kind of no that makes the neck tighten because it never lasts. Havoc slid to a console, fingers on keys, eyes unfocused, mouth moving without sound. His world poured itself into a drive he fed it, and the drive drank like a desert man who at last believes the canteen isn't a lie. Ghost took the far corner, his muzzle painting arcs. Brick shed 2 charges and tucked them under the end racks where the steel braces tied to deck beams, then fished out a ceramic blade to score paint around a conduit that fed something power he didn't want fed for long. Doc stood with Kid in the doorway, bodies slightly offset, so one round wouldn't take both. Cole watched Havoc screen and the room at once, because the room would try to kill them and the screen would tell them how far they had gotten before it happened. Under everything, the sea kept breathing. The hull flexed with it, steel groaning along, low note that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with physics. The ship turned a fraction and the inertia creaked through the frame. Somewhere far away a door slammed metal to metal, and the sound came along pipes until it arrived in the team's ears like a rumor. Havoc's whisper carried. Tehran routing fingerprints present. Multi-hop obfuscation through Port Sudan, Aden, Bandar Abbas. Funding trails mapped. Vessel schedule injection captured. 90 seconds to finish the pull. 90 seconds on a ship where men who aren't sailors walk sentry patterns is a kind of eternity that wears teeth. Boots hit deck outside the corridor. Not many. Enough. The cadence was wrong for sailors. Right for men who'd learned to clear rooms from a manual and then the hard way. Ghost sank deeper into his corner and pressed the world into angles he could command. Brick set his last 2 charges faster than he liked. Doc rolled his shoulders once, quietly, to keep them loose. Kid lifted his muzzle 1 inch higher and found the sight picture he'd been fighting for since the RHIB left the wake behind. Cole checked the time he did not wear and kept Havoc in his periphery. The man's fingers moved with a pianist's economy, extracting names from ice and giving them to heat. The drive's activity LED winked like a heartbeat pushed too fast and not ready to stop. The boots outside paused. A hand touched the hatchdogs. A man on the other side leaned just enough to put his ear near steel. The kind of lean you do when you know this door shouldn't be warm, and it is. Cole raised his fist low where only his team could see. The room held one breath. The sea kept breathing on its own. The ship decided whether it loved or hated the men inside her. The hatchdogs began to turn. The hatchdogs spun with a squeal of dry steel, the sound too loud in the sterile hum of the server room. Havoc's fingers never stopped, keys clicking in staccato rhythm, as if the approaching boots were part of his tempo. The drive light pulsed fast, swallowing Tehran's shadow line by line. 90 seconds had shrunk to 20. Cole's hand flattened low. Hold! Ghost slid his rifle an inch higher, the barrel leveled on the hatch seam. Brick shifted, hand already palming the detonator for the shaped charges tucked under steel ribs. Doc and Kid braced the doorframe, muzzles tight, Kid's breath loud until he forced it shallow. The last dog turned. The hatch opened a crack. A sliver of warm light bled in. Voices whispered, clipped Arabic threaded with Farsi tones. Men trained elsewhere. A hand pushed the door wider. Cole's palm cut down. Ghost's rifle coughed once, then again. 2 heads snapped back in silence, their bodies folding against the hatch frame before sound could follow. Doc and Kid opened fire a breath later, rounds snapping through the gap. A third man stumbled in, rifle half raised, before Kid's burst cut him down. The body hit the deck with a flat metallic crack. Shouts erupted in the corridor, boots scrambling, rifles hammering the steel walls. Rounds sparked off bulkhead edges, ricochets whining through the room. Havoc hunched lower, shouting over the storm. 10 seconds. Almost there. Cole returned fire in disciplined bursts, covering the doorway. Ghost slipped to the opposite flank, his sidearm spitting 2 rounds into the shadows. Doc dragged Kid lower, guiding his aim upward to cut silhouettes through the smoke. Kid's shots steadied, punching men back into the corridor. Brick laughed low, yanked a grenade from his vest, and rolled it out the door. The blast hammered the bulkhead, smoke and shrapnel rolling back in waves. Shouts cut short. The drive light went solid green. Havoc tore it free, slammed it into a pouch, sealed it with trembling fingers. Done. Cole's hand snapped. Exfil. Now. Ghost took point, sliding through the doorway into smoke. His rifle snapped twice, clearing the hall. Cole pushed Havoc after him, then Doc and Kid, then Brick hauling rear. The corridor became a kill box. Muzzle flashes, strobing shadows into half-seen shapes. Ghost moved in bursts, each shot surgical, each step measured. Cole matched him, their fire overlapping, creating a rhythm that drove the team forward. The ship groaned underfoot, hull vibrating with power. Alarms began to wail, sharp and metallic, echoing through steel like a siren trapped in a drum. The whole vessel knew now. They reached the deck hatch, the night spilling in cool and sharp, salt air cutting through smoke. Ghost climbed first, rifle high, then hauled Havoc up. Doc shoved Kid through, followed Cole behind them. Brick came last, tossing another grenade into the corridor before slamming the hatch shut. The blast shook the deck beneath their boots. The open night sprawled wide around them, moonlight carving silver lines on water, the freighter's deck long and flat, its cranes standing like black skeletons against the sky. Shadows moved across it, fighters converging from bow and stern, rifles catching faint light. Cole raised his rifle. Ghost mirrored him. Doc covered the flank. Kid steadied on the rail, barrel locking onto targets. Brick set his pack down with a grin, hands already busy with charges. Havoc crouched low, clutching the drive, one hand keeping his rifle steady. The freighter was awake. The sea was watching, and the ghosts had come to take the night. The night on deck was colder than the engine room's hum, a wind carrying brine and iron, moving slow and heavy across steel. The SEALs crouched in shadow beneath the bridge wing, rifles lifted, the sea stretching black around them. Above, silhouettes moved against glass, voices sharp in clipped Farsi, commands spilling down into the ship's bones. The freighter was awake, but not yet screaming. Cole signaled, "Move silent." Ghost slid ahead, his steps less than footsteps, more the impression of weight distributed evenly until it ceased to matter. His rifle swept arcs tight against his cheek, his breath steady. He passed a coil of line, boots silent on paint scarred by rust. Two men stood at the rail forward, eyes on the water. Ghost stopped, sighted, and his rifle whispered twice. Both dropped forward, NVG glow dimming as bodies folded against the ocean's dark. Neither made a sound louder than the sea. Brick crept behind with a grin only teeth could see. His pack bulked wider in shadow, charges set to sing when their time came. He rolled past the bodies Ghost left cooling on steel, pausing only to tug a pin from his vest. He planted another charge beneath a davit, hand sure, movement fast, a lover's touch to steel that would soon betray its ship. He straightened with a growl low in his chest, then followed Ghost on. Doc and Kid pressed against the bulkhead, rifles sweeping aft. A man stepped through a hatch, yawning, his rifle slung careless. Kid's muzzle snapped up, breath shallow. Doc's hand tapped his shoulder once. Not yet. Ghost appeared from shadow like smoke, one hand clamping the man's mouth, knife flashing up under his ribs. He lowered the body without a sound, eyes never meeting Kid's. Doc's nod said the lesson. Patience is louder than bullets. Havoc stayed in center, antenna tight to his back, eyes on the bridge glass above. He whispered into the net, his voice dry. Patrol craft closing from starboard, range less than 3 kilometers. Their wake says they smell us. His other hand stroked the pouch with the drive, like a man clutching something alive. Cole's eyes scanned forward. The bow loomed, anchor chains glistening black, steel wet from spray. A guard leaned against the capstan, smoking, his head lifting to track the horizon. Cole sighted and fired once. The man's body crumpled slow, cigarette ember falling, hissing out on wet steel. Cole motioned forward. The team ghosted past open hatches, every one of them bleeding faint yellow light, the stink of machine oil and sweat rising. Voices carried, boots echoing below. They weren't alone, dozens more men, waking, gearing, arming. Cole counted the rhythm, noted where the nets of patrols would tighten. He tapped his forearm twice. Brick understood, planting more charges. Insurance, fire to come. A shout cracked sharp aft, followed by the clang of boots running. Someone had found the server room carnage. Alarms wailed, not bells but klaxons, mechanical and brutal, cutting in a night like a blade. The ship howled awake. Cole raised his hand, finger spread. Hold! The deck exploded with noise. Men shouting in Farsi and Arabic, orders sharp, rifles clattering from racks. Floodlights snapped on, sweeping the deck in harsh white beams, shadows scattered like prey. The seals pressed lower, still cloaked in angles the lights missed. For the moment, Cole met Ghost's eyes, then Brick's grin. The silent ghosting was over. The firestorm waited on his signal. The klaxon howled across steel, echoing into the Red Sea night. Floodlights carved the deck into harsh white lanes. Shadows ripped away. Men poured from hatches, rifles raised, their boots a drumbeat on steel. The freighter wasn't a vessel anymore. It was a fortress awake and bleeding soldiers. Cole didn't wait. His thumb pressed the remote on Brick's chest rig. The ship convulsed. Charges roared along the starboard beam, fire belching from seams where steel should have held. The davit tore free with a shriek, slamming into the deck and scattering men like insects. A secondary blast followed, deeper, ripping through conduit runs beneath their boots. Smoke clawed upward, black and choking, lit orange by fire that bloomed too fast. Ghost fired first, muzzle flashes strobing white under floodlights. 3 men dropped before they finished raising rifles. Brick bellowed as he cut, a burst through smoke, the recoil hammering his shoulder, his grin savage. Doc's fire was sharp and surgical, his round stitching 2 sentries near the hatch before they found cover. Kid's shots joined, ragged at first, then steady, each trigger pull less hesitant, more controlled. The deck became chaos. Fighters screamed in Farsi, scattering, some firing wild, others tried to flank along gangways. Ghost shots cut them off, precise arcs snapping heads back. Brick hurled a grenade into a cluster by the hatch, the explosion hurling bodies against steel, blood spraying across floodlight glare. Havoc crouched by the winch, firing bursts one-handed while his other clutched the drive. His lips moved fast, counting bearings, listening through the chaos. Patrol craft closing, 1 minute. We burn or we drown. His voice was flat, certain. The freighter lurched under them, its screws biting harder, rudder straining. Smoke boiled out of the deck house, flames licking higher. Men screamed inside, pounding against hatches that jammed under the force of Brick's charges. Cole moved with purpose through fire and smoke, rifle steady, each burst carving a path. He shouted signals, short, clipped, his voice cutting through alarms. Left flank, suppress. Forward push. Every command turned chaos into rhythm, his men flowing with him. A fighter burst from smoke 5 feet away, muzzle flashing. Cole slammed his rifle, but into the man's jaw, bones snapping. He fired point blank into his chest, then turned, cutting another down before he reached the rail. Ghost was there, silent, sidearm low, dropping 2 more in clean arcs. Kid stumbled as an explosion rocked the deck, almost pitching him overboard. Doc's hand caught his vest, hauling him back. The bridge lights flickered, then went dark. The freighter groaned, fire spreading, alarms shrieking in a mechanical wail. Smoke boiled upward, blotting the moon, painting the sea orange in reflection. Cole's voice cut the net. Time's up. Out. Ghost nodded once, covering as the others fell back toward the rail. Brick planted his last charge against a bulkhead, arming it with a grin. Doc dragged Kid with him, the boy's jaw set hard against pain. Havoc clutched the drive, his eyes burning fever bright. Cole fired until his mag clicked empty, then swapped his last rounds carving a gap through fire and smoke. He signaled once, over the rail. Now, the SEALs went one by one, rappelling back into night, into the RHIB waiting below. Ghost last, his rifle never ceasing until he slid over and vanished in a shadow. Brick hit the detonator. The freighter tore itself apart. Fire erupted in a chain, steel bending, smoke boiling skyward. The deck split, flames swallowing men who screamed until water took them. The ship staggered, its bow sinking, stern rising, its body broken. The RHIB roared away, wake foaming. The seals crouched low, smoke and fire painting the sea behind them. Cole looked back once, eyes hard, the freighter collapsing into flame. Terran's weapons gone, their trail cut, proof sealed in Havoc's pouch. The mission wasn't done. The sea was alive, patrol craft closing, searchlights sweeping. But the freighter was burning, and that was enough for now. The freighter's corpse burned against the horizon, a pillar of smoke rising black into the night, its flames licking the sky orange. The sea carried the glow in broken reflection, rippling across the waves like fire spilled onto water. The RHIB surged low and fast, wake stretching white behind. The men crouched tight to the deck, bodies heavy with exhaustion and smoke. Cole stood braced near the bow, harness clipped, eyes locked aft where the freighter listed, bow dipping lower with each groan of steel. His NVGs painted the wreck in eerie green, the fire turning into a bright smear that made the horizon look jagged. He said nothing. The sight was confirmation enough. Terran's hand erased from these waters, at least for now. Ghost sat forward, his rifle cradled across his knees. He never looked at the fire. They all knew he didn't need to. His focus was outward, searching the sea, watching every shadow that wasn't shadow, every ripple that moved against the wind. His silence was heavier now, a weight across the boat, his face unreadable in NVG glow. Brick stretched back against the rib's side, chest heaving, sweat streaking soot across his jaw. He laughed once, low, breathless, and muttered into the net, not for anyone but himself. That's one less ship Tehran can hide behind. His grin lingered, but his eyes were wide and restless, pupils blown from adrenaline. Doc crouched near Kid, wrapping a fresh dressing over the boy's arm where blood soaked through torn fabric. His hands worked calm, precise, even as the RHIB bounced against Chop. Kid clenched his teeth, jaw locked, but his eyes stayed forward, fixed on the horizon, not the wound. Doc said nothing, only pressed gauze and tape, then clapped a shoulder once before turning his rifle back outward. Havoc hunched over his receiver, headset pressed tight, the data drive clutched against his vest like a relic. His screen blinked static, the sea thick with noise, open channels screaming in panic, distress calls flooding from fishing vessels, coastal stations demanding identification from anyone on the water. He shook his head once, voice dry, ragged. They know. The straits are alive now. Patrol craft converting. No names, just teeth. The rib's driver cut engines low, throttling back until the hull skimmed softer across waves. The roar died into a murmur. For a moment, only the sea spoke, water hissing against fiberglass, wind cutting across helmets. It was almost peaceful, the kind of quiet that made men remember how tired they were, how heavy their gear sat, how loud their own heartbeats sounded in the absence of gunfire. Cole finally turned, scanning each of them. Ghost silent, steady as always. Brick sweating, grin fading. .com, eyes sharp even in the lull. Kid pale, jaw tight but still locked in. Havoc restless, muttering numbers under his breath, chasing patterns in static. The lull wasn't rest. It was the space between. Cole felt it in his bones. The sea was waiting. Patrol craft would come, engines snarling, searchlights carving the black. The fire behind them was a beacon. Every hostile vessel within 20 miles was angling their bows toward that glow. He adjusted his harness, leaned forward, voice low and hard. This isn't over. Eyes up. Ghost's head tilted once, his silence agreeing. Brick's grin sharpened again, as if the fight's return was a promise. Doc's hand steadied on his rifle. Kid exhaled slow, finding the rhythm again. Havoc muttered coordinates, almost feverish. The sea stretched black and endless, the glow of fire shrinking behind them, smoke climbing higher. The quiet was already cracking. The quiet cracked with engines. Low at first, a vibration riding across the waves, then louder, closer, a growl multiplied by numbers. Cole's head lifted, eyes scanning aft. Ghost had already turned, NVGs painting the horizon in green smear. Faint silhouettes formed against the glow of the burning freighter. Patrol craft, fast, armed, their bows cutting white scars into the black water. Havoc's voice rasped into the net. For boats, closing from stern quarter. Speed high, wake heavy. They're hunting. Cole's hand cut down sharp. Brace. The rib's driver shoved the throttles forward. The engines howled, hull lifting, spray slapping helmets. The SEALs crouched low, rifles braced, every muscle coiled against the sea's jolt. The burning freighter shrank behind them, but the patrol boats gained, their wakes boiling white, searchlights snapping on in jagged arcs. The first beam swept across the waves, finding nothing, then caught the RHIB in its edge. White light flared across their helmets. Gunfire ripped a second later, heavy machine gun tracers carving red lines low across the sea. Ghost snapped to his feet, balanced against the rib's roll. His rifle barked once, muzzle flash swallowed by night. The gunner on the nearest boat jerked, slumped, his weapon chewing sky instead of water. Ghost dropped back in a crouch, silent again, chambers cycling smooth. Brick bellowed over the net, already shouldering the captured RPG tube. The sea bucked under him, spray soaking his vest, but his grin never faltered. He fired. The rocket screamed low across black water, smoke trailing, then slammed into the lead boat's bow. Fire erupted, the vessel pitching sideways, bodies tumbling into the sea. Shouts carried across the waves, then vanished under the roar. The other three boats closed harder, guns hammering, tracers splitting the dark. Bullets hissed into spray, slamming the rib's hull, punching holes through its sides. Water began seeping in, a thin stream pooling at their boots. Doc fired short bursts, cutting into silhouettes hunched behind rails. One man dropped, another staggered, still firing wild. Kid's rifle chattered beside him, rounds stitching across a gunner's nest. The man fell screaming, splashing into black water as the boat surged past. Havoc shouted into the comms, voice breaking under the sea's roar. They're pushing us into the shoals, North Rocks, shallow water. If we follow their line, we die. Cole's answer was flat, calm, absolute. Then we break their line. The RHIB swerve hard, spray drenching them. The patrol boats adjusted instantly, their wakes cutting tight curves, guns hammering again. One swung broadside, blocking the path east, muzzle flash, pouring fire. Rounds chewed the water around them, the sea itself erupting in splashes. Cole's rifle barked, 3 controlled bursts, cutting the gunner back from his mount. He shouted over the net, voice a steel edge. Ghost, drop their driver. Ghost rose into the spray, NVGs haloed with droplets. He fired once, then twice. The patrol boat jerked sideways, helm abandoned, its bow slewing wide. It slammed into the second craft beside it, the two colliding in a crash of steel and sparks. Fire licked their decks, screams spilling across the water. Brick roared, shouldered another rocket, and fired into the wreckage. The explosion lifted both vessels, a plume of fire clawing skyward. The sea hissed with raining debris. Only one patrol boat remained, surging fast, its guns still alive. It cut a wide arc trying to flank. Its spotlight speared the RHIB, blinding white, bullets hammering the deck. The driver hunched low, struggling to keep course. Cole fired back, Doc steady beside him, Kid's shots wild but pressing. Ghost sighted, squeezed, and the spotlight shattered, plunging the sea back into shadow. Brick pulled another rocket, but the tube was empty. He cursed, spat, and raised his rifle instead, his laughter ragged in the spray. The patrol boat drew close, too close, its bow cutting waves like knives. Men shouted on its deck, rifles barking. Havoc crouched lower, clutching the drive, voice sharp. They'll ram us. Cole's answer was steal. Then kill them before they can. The SEALs rose as one, rifles hammering, tracers crossing into shadows. Ghost rounds found the helm. Docs cut down a gunner. Kids stitched the rail. Bricks burst, chewing bodies back into smoke. The patrol boat faltered, swung wide, then erupted in flame as Brick hurled his last frag into its fuel lines. Fire climbed the night, reflected across black water. Silence followed, broken only by the engines and their own ragged breathing. The wrecks burned behind, the freighter still glowing on the horizon. The RHIB surged forward, battered but alive, water pooling around their boots. Cole looked back once, eyes hard, then forward again. Havoc's voice whispered over the net, low, certain. They'll send more. Bigger. Faster. This isn't finished. Cole's jaw clenched. His hand steadied on his rifle. Then we keep moving. The Red Sea was alive with hunters, and they were ghosts in its teeth. The RHIB bucked against the waves, hull groaning under the weight of bullet holes, water sloshing higher around their boots. The driver pushed the throttles, but the port engine coughed, sputtered, then caught again, leaving a shudder that rattled the whole boat. The smell of fuel and salt mingled sharp in the air. Behind them, wreckage burned across the water, freighter and patrol boats alike, smoke climbing in thick, ugly columns. But ahead, the horizon was no longer empty. Lights moved across the sea, white, red, sweeping arcs of search beams stabbing into the dark. Engines rumbled low, deeper than the patrol boats they'd already faced. Bigger ships, heavier teeth. Havoc's voice cracked over the net. Words carried on static. Corvettes. Naval. They've loosed the real dogs. Cole's hand cut down sharp, hard. New heading. Toward the coast. The RHIB swung, spray hissing. The coastline rose jagged against the stars, a wall of black cliffs and scattered lights where villages clung to stone. The sea narrowed here, waves breaking against reefs that reached like knives. The boat skimmed over shallows, hull banging against chop, alarms wailing as the bilge pump failed to keep up. Ghost crouched forward, scanning the cliffs through NVGs, narrow coves. Rock shelves, places a boat could wedge if you knew how to read the sea. His hand lifted once there. Cole signaled the driver, and the RHIB veered into a seam of dark water, slipping between reef teeth where only shadows belonged. Tracer fire arced from the horizon, heavy guns probing the black. Shells landed behind them, geysers of water rising, crashing down in sheets. The RHIB shuddered as spray hammered their helmets, engines screaming as the driver shoved everything they had into speed. Brick roared, half in rage, half in laughter, his hand gripping his rifle like he could will it to shoot farther than it ever could. The cove appeared sudden, cliffs breaking into a hollow cut by centuries of surf. The RHIB slammed into shingle, hull grinding. Water poured through its wounds, the boat dying even as it carried them ashore. Cole unhooked his harness and signaled. Out. The SEALs splashed into the surf, boots sinking into wet gravel. Ghost moved first, rifle raised, scanning the cliffs. Doc and Kid hauled Havoc between them, the comms man stumbling, still clutching the drive as if it were part of his body. Brick came last, shouldering his pack, muttering curses at the sea. The cliffs loomed above, jagged, shadowed, hostile. The surf roared behind, covering their movements as the RHIB slipped back into the tide, sinking, vanishing like it had never lived. Cole looked back once. Out on the horizon, beams swept wider, ships prowling closer. The Red Sea was alive with predators, their hunt unbroken. The SEALs were off the water, but not safe. He pointed up the cliff, hand slicing. Ghost nodded and began the climb, boots and fingers finding holds in wet stone. The others followed, one by one, rifles slung, breath ragged. Rocks cut palms, salt-burned cuts, sweat ran cold under armor. They crested the cliff and lay flat in scrub and stone. The coastline stretched jagged, villages flickering with faint lamps, dirt tracks winding inland. Somewhere out there, cods had eyes and teeth. Somewhere out there, the hunt would continue. Cole scanned the horizon, jaw set. They were ashore now, ghosts pressed into hostile coast. The sea still hunted, but the land was worse. He rose to a crouch, signaling forward. The mission wasn't finished. The Red Sea had spat them on a stone. The fight would continue in Gaza's shadowed twin, the coast itself. The climb had left their hands raw, stone tearing skin beneath gloves, muscles burning with each pull. By the time they lay belly down on the ridge, the sea below was nothing but a black roar, its foam flashing faint in moonlight. The burning freighter was only a smear of glow against the horizon now, but its smoke had already told the enemy everything they needed to know. Cole lifted his NVGs, scanning inland. The cliffs rolled into broken scrubland, thorn bushes low to the ground, jagged rocks jutting like teeth. A faint track wound between them, wide enough for a pickup or a small convoy. Beyond that, silence. Too much silence. Ghost shifted beside him, one hand raised. He tapped his forearm twice, then pointed to the track. Shapes. Moving low. Cole followed the gesture, glass through his scope. Figures. Not villagers. Their movement was too rehearsed, too deliberate. Spacing measured, weapons at the ready. Brick muttered low, teeth bared in a grin. They already know we're here. Cole's hand signaled down. Hold. Wait. The figures drew closer, their silhouettes clearer in NVG green. 10, maybe 12 spread in 2 fire teams. They moved like men who knew the terrain, quiet feet, eyes scanning. Cod's hunters, sent to finish what the patrol boats had failed. The seals melted into the stone. Ghost adjusted his rifle an inch at a time, sight steady, breath slowed. Doc eased Kid lower, his hand pressing between shoulder blades until the boy's chest calmed, until panic turned to patience. Havoc crouched tight, drive pouch pinned under his vest, whispering into comms even though no one answered. Brick's thumb stroked the safety of his rifle, his grin growing sharper in shadow. The first enemy reached the base of the ridge. He paused, lifted his NVGs, scanning the cliff. He was close enough that Cole could see the sweat streaking his temples. The man raised a hand, signaling halt. Cole's fist closed. Ghost's rifle cracked, suppressed thunder. The man dropped, skull snapping, his body folding into scrub. Chaos erupted. Shouts in Farsi cut the night, rifles barking, tracers streaking green through darkness. The hunters scattered into firing lines, pouring rounds up the cliff. Stone chipped, dust filled the air. Brick roared, rolling onto his side, his rifle hammering bursts that chewed the track below. One man spun, fell, another staggered back, clutching his chest. Grenades arced up from below, clattering against stone. Cole shouted sharp move. The team shifted, rolling behind outcrops as explosions shredded scrub and rock, shrapnel singing past their helmets. Doc fired controlled, 2 rounds finding shadows. He pressed Kid into the gap between rocks, muzzle guiding him. Voice calm even as tracers stitched the ridge above. Kid exhaled, sighted, fired. His first round went wide, second found a chest, third dropped a man trying to crawl forward. Doc's nod was invisible in the dark, but Kid felt it. Havoc's voice hissed. More inbound. East track. 2 minutes. They're calling reinforcements. Cole's jaw clenched. He fired into the line below, muzzle steady, then shouted over the net, voice hard as steel. Break contact. Ghost cover. Brick, smoke. Doc, move Kid. Havoc with me. Brick ripped 2 smoke canisters, rolled them downslope. White clouds burst, curling thick, choking vision. Ghost's rifle snapped through gaps in the haze. Each round precise, each kill measured. Cole shifted the team left along the ridge, moving low, crawling, boots scraping stone. The enemy fired blind into smoke, their shouts growing angrier, closer. A flare hissed overhead, bathing the ridge in white. The seals froze in stark light, every shadow erased. Rounds hammered into stone, sparks flying. Kid pressed his helmet against the rock, breath sharp. Doc's hand gripped his collar, pulling him tighter into cover. Brick bellowed, firing back, the muzzle flashed bright against flare light. Ghost dropped 2 men before the flare burned out, plunging the world back into black. Smoke curled again, thick, hiding them. Cole pointed east. They moved, fast, low, bodies pressed into the ridge as the enemy regrouped. The cliffs rang with fire and shouts, the smell of smoke and blood heavy on the wind. The ambush hadn't broken them, but had scattered the night with enemies. The coast was alive now, and every ridge would bleed more teeth. Cole's eyes hardened behind NVGs. They weren't hunted anymore. They were in the kill zone. The smoke clung to the rocks like ghost breath, curling white ribbons that refused to fade, masking shapes and muzzle flashes. Cole drove the team east along the ridge, his hand signals sharp, uncompromising. Stay low. Stay moving. No second fights here. The cliffs turned jagged, the stone breaking into gullies that funneled the sea wind. Their boots scraped, slipped, caught again, every step betraying sound in the hush between bursts of gunfire. Below, shouts echoed, the Cod's hunters regrouping, spreading like ink across the coastline. Every ridge would be a snare, every shadow a barrel aimed their way. Ghost stayed rearguard, his rifle breaking rhythm only when he had certainty. One shot dropped a man cresting too fast. Another shattered a silhouette moving through smoke. He was quiet even when he killed. No breath wasted, no sound but steel and silence. Brick climbed higher along the ridge, his bulk visible only in the NVG glow of his pack. He turned once, teeth flashing, voice low and rough over the net. They want us boxed. We'll bleed him before they cage us. His laughter was quiet, but carried a weight that made Kid shiver. Doc pressed Kid forward, guiding him through gaps in the rock. The boy's chest heaved, every breath scraping like broken glass. But his muzzle stayed up, his steps steadier now. Sweat ran down his face, cutting clean lines through soot. Doc's hand stayed near, not carrying him but tethering him, keeping panic from cutting loose. Havoc stumbled once on loose stone, nearly dropping the drive. Cole caught his arm and yanked him forward, steadying him with a look more than touch. Havoc's lips moved fast, muttering bearings and coordinates even as he ran. More chatter inland. Convoys. They're moving gear from port. His voice cracked then steadied. They know exactly where we are. The cliffs ended in a ravine, stone walls pressing close, the path down choked with thorn and scree. Cole motioned, single file fast. They descended in silence, boots rolling stones that clattered too loud, each sound echoing like a signal flare. Shouts followed. The hunters had tracked them, moving fast along the ridge above. Tracers hissed down into the ravine, sparks showering stone. Cole shoved them into cover, rifles snapping back in short bursts. Ghost shots climbed the ridge, each crack dropping a silhouette. Brick through smoke, grenades uphill, clouds drifting thick, swallowing light. They broke out of the ravine in a scrubland, sloping toward a cluster of faint lamps. A village, stone houses huddled against the coast, alleys tight and narrow, walls scarred by old wars. Dogs barked as the seals approached, their howls echoing through the night. Lights snapped on, shutters slammed. Figures darted across rooftops. Civilians, maybe. Fighters, more likely. Cole signaled quick. Through the village. No hesitation. They moved in a wedge, rifles sweeping alleys, boots splashing in puddles where pipes leaked into dirt. The village smelled of salt and dust and fear. A door opened. An old man stared, then vanished. A window slammed. Above, a muzzle flashed from a rooftop. Kid fired instinctively, dropping the shape before Doc could speak. His breathing quickened, then steadied, his jaw locking hard. The hunters poured into the village behind them, shouts rising, boots pounding. The night cracked with gunfire, tracers slicing alleys, bullets sparking against stone. Women screamed from darkened houses, children cried, and the SEALs pushed through it all, rifles steady, moving fast. Brick hurled a grenade into a narrow alley. The blast tore stone and dust into the air, collapsing part of a wall onto the hunters. Ghost shot two more as they scrambled over rubble. Cole's voice cut sharp, guiding every step. Forward. Doc's ahead. Extraction line. Havoc stumbled again, but his eyes never left the drive. He muttered through blood on his lips. "We've got them. All their routes, their names, their money. If we make it out, Tehran bleeds." His words were a mantra, keeping him moving. The SEALs burst out of the village into open ground, the sea glinting faint beyond. But headlights flared ahead, engines roaring. More fighters cutting them off, rifles raised, trucks bristling with guns. Cole's fist closed, his jaw set. No choice. The pursuit wasn't ending here. It was funneling them toward a final stand. The trucks cut their engines, headlights stabbing white across the broken ground. Men spilled from the beds, rifles already up, voices barking in Farsi and Arabic, their shouts echoing hard against stone. Behind, the hunters from a village pushed closer, muzzle flashes sparking from alleys, bullets whining into the dirt around the SEALs' boots. They were trapped. The sea clawed black against the rocks below. No dock, no cover, just a drop in a surf that would smash bone against stone. The only way forward was through the line of trucks, their guns already thundering. Cole dropped to a knee, sighting in, his voice hard in the net. "This is it. Hold the cliff. Hold it until we bleed them out or the bird comes. No retreat. No collapse. Hold." Ghost settled beside him, eyes cold, rifle already finding angles. His shots cracked steady, precise, each one cutting a gunner from truck, each muzzle flash dying under his barrel. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than Brick's laughter. Brick roared, firing in ragged bursts, then hurling his last grenades into the oncoming line. Explosions tore bodies from the ground, dust and smoke rising in pillars. His grin split through blood, teeth bared against the night. When his rifle clicked dry, he drew his sidearm and knife, muttering curses through clenched teeth. Doc pressed Kid against stone, guiding his rifle upward. Snipers flashed from the ridges above. Doc's pistol barked, dropping one, then another. Kid fired at the third, his shot true, the silhouette tumbling down in silence. Doc nodded once, then turned back, firing bursts with calm precision, his voice low, steadying the boy's breath even in the storm. Havoc crouched lower, clutching the drive, his receiver long dead, headset torn free. His rifle fired wild into the dark, not from fear but fury, his mutters spilling into the night. Names, numbers, accounts, ports. Tehran's ghosts bleeding out into his hands. The hunters surged from both sides, tracers whipping through air, stone chipping, sparks spraying. The cliffside became a furnace, smoke thick, dust choking lungs. Cole fired in rhythm, 3-round bursts that carved men from the fight. His jaw was tight, his eyes steel, his commands few but sharp. Left flank. Push them. Hold fire. Reload. But the wave pressed harder. Trucks rolled closer, their guns spitting fire, cutting stone to shrapnel. Brick bellowed and stood tall, firing into the lights until his vest sparked with hits, rounds punching him back. He dropped to a knee, blood soaking, but his grin never faded. He spat red into dirt and fired again. A rocket hissed from the truck line, screaming toward the cliff. Ghost saw it, his rifle snapping. The gunner's head snapped back, the rocket skidding low, exploding harmless in surf. Spray drenched them, salt and blood mixing, the roar swallowing shouts. The SEALs tightened their circle, back to stone, rifles hot, mags nearly empty. Cole checked his last, slammed it in, and fired again. The night howled with enemy fire, the cliff shaking under their weight. It was ending here, until the sky answered. The thump of rotors cut through gunfire. A shadow loomed over the ridge, lights off, a black hawk diving hard. Its minigun spun, tracers raining fire into the trucks. Vehicles erupted in flame, bodies thrown screaming. The gunship rolled in behind, rockets streaking, detonating the ridges where snipers hid. The night turned to fire and thunder. Cole shouted, "Birds here! Move!" Brick dragged himself up, bloodied, roaring as he fired one last burst into the collapsing line. Doc shoved Kid forward, covering his flank, both running low through dust and smoke. Havoc clutched the drive tight, his face lit by fire, muttering like a man possessed. Ghost walked backward, his rifle never missing, his silence carrying them. They scrambled to the edge as the Black Hawk hovered, skids low, rotors tearing the smoke. Cole shoved Havoc in, then Kid, then Document Brick hauled himself, blood trailing. Ghost came last, firing until his mag clicked empty, then leapt caught by hands pulling him inside. The bird lifted, tracers chasing, mortars thumping from far behind. The gunship answered, rockets flattening the trucks, miniguns sowing fire into stone. The cliff fell away, swallowed by Black Sea. Inside, the SEALs collapsed into the floor, chests heaving, blood-soaking gear. Havoc clutched the drive, eyes wild. Brick laughed through blood, Doc pressing hands against wounds. Kid sat pale, but unbroken, rifle clutched. Ghost sat silent, eyes distant. Cole stood by the hatch, watching the burning coastline vanish. They had survived the cliff, but the Red Sea still hunted, and its ghost carried them forward into the next war.